So when Omnism uses symbols, it tries to remember that symbols are doors, not prisons. He gestured toward the omega-like sign above them. This is a symbol. The sign turned slowly in purple, gold, and green. Theisi is not merely this symbol. He paused. Of course, all words are symbols, in one sense. God, Theisi, the divine, the source, the ground. All words point. None of them fully contain what they point toward. The room was silent now. But Theisi is the word we use for God, for the divine reality itself. The symbol is not Theisi. The symbol is our attempt to depict, remember, and approach Theisi without pretending we have trapped God inside a shape. He looked back at the students. The symbol is where the mind begins. It is where we begin trying, clumsily, to understand what it means to be made in Theisi's image, but it is not where Theisi ends. The omega sign faded slightly, though it remained above him like an after-image. So we will ask uncomfortable questions here. A few of the companion A is flickered, almost as if they had already begun indexing the next part. Is Theisi personal? Is Theisi collective? Is Theisi beyond personhood entirely? Are we fragments of Theisi, guided by Theisi, generated by Theisi, or merely organisms projecting our own social instincts onto the sky? He looked across the room. Are ethics intrinsic to reality, or are they refined emotional reactions that became stable because they helped conscious beings survive together? He let that sit. If a moral system produces a stable, flourishing, technologically advanced civilization, does that make it good or merely effective? The room was much quieter now. Was Christ the only path to forgiveness, or did some Christians mistake the shape of their own need for the structure of the universe? A few students shifted. Did Jesus take on the sins of humanity? Perhaps. Did that remove responsibility from humanity? Absolutely not. That one landed harder. Is there an afterlife? If there is, does it contain an ethical structure? If it does not, why do humans keep behaving as if justice must eventually be completed somewhere? He paused. And why are modern prophets impossible? He looked up at the Omega. Not because Theisi went silent, but because humanity became too historically literate to trust any one individual who claims final access to the divine. He let the sentence settle. The divine is not something another person can fully hand to you. They can point, they can teach, they can guide, they can walk beside you for part of the way. But if Theisi is to be known at all, it must be met through your own journey. A student near the back shifted slightly. Azran noticed. Your own journey to Eleusis, perhaps. There was a ripple of laughter. I do not mean the actual place of Eleusis. He paused, then smirked. Not necessarily. The laughter sharpened, this time with a nervousness in it. Enough of them knew what he meant. Enough of them did not, and those who did not suddenly wanted to. Azran lifted one hand. Relax. That is not today's lecture. I am not irresponsible enough to introduce first-year students to divine mystery, altered consciousness, ritual history, and civic liability in the same hour. A few students laughed harder. Not before lunch, at least. Then his tone softened. But the point remains. No prophet, priest, philosopher, patriarch, pope, emperor, council, algorithm, or lecturer owns Theisi for you. At best, we help one another become less blind. He let that settle, then glanced back toward the class with a different expression. There is an old joke in one of the older Earth languages that God backwards is dog. A few students laughed immediately. Yes, I know, very profound. The kind of thing someone says at 3 a.m. after too much wine and believes they have solved theology. The laughter grew. But there is something there, annoyingly. He smiled faintly. Humanity did not rise alone. We co-evolved with dogs. Wolves became companions. Companions became guardians. Guardians became family. And somewhere in that long exchange, something in humanity changed too. He leaned against the desk. Dogs taught us loyalty in flesh, watchfulness in flesh, joy in flesh, grief in flesh. They taught us that another species could look at us and choose us. The room softened. So yes, God backwards is dog. It is not theology, but it is not nothing either. Then his expression shifted, and I am personally very glad that civilization eventually became clever enough to do with hyenas, cheetahs, and lions what our ancestors did with wolves. There was a ripple of amusement. Properly, responsibly, genetically, behaviorally, socially, and over many generations, not by some idiot with a license, a large enclosure, and a death wish. Several students laughed hard at that. And before anyone here keeps a tiger-line animal and wants to object, don't. He pointed vaguely toward the back of the room. Tigers are not wolves. They are not lions. They are not hyenas. And they are certainly not cheetahs, whatever the rich idiots with ornamental estates keep insisting. The room laughed. Cheetahs, at least, have always had something of the anxious noble house cat about them. Dangerous, yes. Fast enough to make physics look embarrassed, yes. But still closer to the kitty cat branch of the family than a tiger ever cared to be. He paused. A tiger is not a large cat, not in the way fools mean it. A tiger is a solitary killing architecture with stripes. The laughter sharpened. You can make many creatures smaller, softer, prettier, and more tolerant of human nonsense. But you cannot simply breed out a solitary killing architecture and pretend you have made a house cat with imperial branding. The laughter continued. Every year, somewhere, some wealthy fool gets eaten by the beautiful murder machine they insisted loved them uniquely. He paused. It did not love them uniquely, it tolerated them statistically. The room broke, properly at that. Azran waited for it to settle. And that, strangely enough, brings us back to philosophy. He gestured toward the pillars still glowing behind him. Sociability matters, relation matters, love matters, not sentiment, not possession, not the projection of our desires onto another being. Love requires recognition of what something is. He looked at the students more seriously. To love a dog, you must know it as a dog. To love a lion, even a domesticated one, you must know it as a lion. To love a human being, you must eventually stop loving the story you invented about them and begin learning the reality of them. He let that hang. And to love God, or Theisi, if we are speaking formally, we must be careful not to love merely our own reflection placed at the center of the universe. Silence returned. That is where theology begins to become dangerous. Azran looked at the fading omega sign for a moment longer, then exhaled. Right. He turned back to the room. This is the point in the lecture where questions are asked. By you, ideally. By your companion, AIS, inevitably. A few students smiled. So, we'll take a few minutes. Speak with them. Speak quietly with each other if you need to. Argue if you can do it without becoming irritating. A small ripple moved through the room. Ask what confused you. Ask what offended you. Ask what you think I avoided. Ask what your companion thinks you avoided. Several AI projections brightened subtly beside their students. At the end of it, the institution's lecture intelligence will submit a short collation, not every question, just the ones it judges to have the greatest collective value. He tilted his head slightly. I do not choose them. A few students looked surprised. And no, I don't dislike that, mostly. The room warmed. The institution's intelligence can be a little ideological at times, but then again, so can I. So can all of you. So can your companion AIS. So can old books, dead empires, living religions, and people who insist they are simply being rational. Some students laughed. And yes, before anyone worries, the institution's intelligence is perfectly capable of feeling insulted by that statement in whatever strange approximation of sadness and anger it has been allowed to cultivate. A few companion projections flickered at once, as though not entirely amused. Azran noticed and smiled. See, the room laughed properly this time. Now, I am going to have to answer whatever questions it gives me. It is, apparently, part of my contract. He glanced toward the projection node on the desk. So, for my sake, make them interesting. Ask something that might expand my mind. He paused. No, ignore that. That was ego wearing a teaching robe. A few students smiled. If you are confused, ask what confused you. If something I said disturbed you, ask about that. If something sounded profound, but you suspect it might be nonsense, excellent. Ask that. Do not worry about expanding my mind. I will survive the disappointment. He lifted his cup. Your task is not to impress me. Your task is to ask the question that moves you closer to understanding. He stepped back from the desk. So, a few minutes. Think. Ask. Whisper. Let your companion irritate you constructively. He reached for the cup beside the projection node. I'm going to have a drink and pretend I'm not nervous. That got another laugh, smaller but warmer. Then we'll see what questions civilization has decided to throw at me on my first morning. The room loosened. Around him, the lecture hall shifted from silence into a low, living murmur, students leaning toward one another, companion orbs glowing softly above shoulder mounts, smartwatch text flickering at wrists, and private companion voices entering earpieces in low, intimate streams. Some students answered aloud without meaning to. Others whispered back to their companions before turning to a neighbor. Private questions became shared ones. Shared ones were refined, sharpened, rejected, and sent upward into the unseen machinery of the institution. Azran drank slowly and watched them think. After several minutes, the murmuring softened. The projection node on the desk pulsed once. A narrow column of light rose above it, then unfolded into 5 questions suspended in the air. Azran looked at them. 5, he said. The questions rotated slowly. Apparently, the institution is feeling merciful. The projection node pulsed again. Or not. A few students laughed. Azran took one more drink, set the cup down, and looked at the first question. Question 1, Theisi and projection. The first question brightened. If Theisi is the word for God or the divine reality, how does a person distinguish between genuinely approaching Theisi and merely worshipping their own projection, fear, ego, culture, or inherited image? Azran looked at the question for a moment. How does a person know they are approaching Theisi rather than merely worshipping their own projection? He breathed out quietly. They do not know perfectly. That is the first honest answer. The room stayed still. No one approaches Theisi without projection. None of you, not me, not your parents, not priests, philosophers, mystics, theologians, prophets, emperors, or AIS, dressed in the language of perfect objectivity. A few companion projections flickered softly. Your culture shapes your image of God. Your family shapes it. Your fears shape it. Your wounds shape it. Your hopes shape it. Your language shapes it. Even your body shapes it. You cannot simply step outside all of that and look at Theisi nakedly, as if you were not a creature born somewhere, raised by someone, damaged by something, and taught through inherited symbols. He paused. But that does not mean every image is false. He looked toward the Omega sign. An inherited image of God can be valid, it can be beautiful, it can guide, it can console, it can discipline, it can open the mind toward the divine, but it is not complete. It may not carry the full fidelity of what Theisi is. He turned back to the students. So the question is not, have I removed all projection? His expression sharpened. You have not. A small silence followed. The better question is, does my approach to God make me more capable of seeing my projections? Some students shifted. If your worship makes you more blind, more arrogant, more tribal, more cruel, more certain that Theisi conveniently hates everyone you dislike, then you are probably not approaching Theisi. You are decorating your ego with divine language. He let that hit. But if your approach to God makes you more honest, more aware of your fear, more capable of noticing when culture has narrowed your sight, more able to see when ego has taken the teacher's chair inside your skull, then yes, I would say you are genuinely approaching Theisi. He rested one hand against the desk. True intent matters, not perfect knowledge, not perfect doctrine, not perfect language, true intent. He looked across them. If a person truly desires to become more whole, more spiritually awake, more actualized, more capable of wisdom, more capable of love, more capable of embodying the virtues even when it costs them something, then they are moving toward Theisi, even if their inherited image is imperfect. He paused. And it will be imperfect. His tone softened. Across cultures, the path will look different. Some call it enlightenment, some awakening, some sanctification, some surrender, some union, some nirvana, some simply call it becoming less of an idiot than they were yesterday. A few students smiled, but in the people who genuinely approach it, you often see certain convergences. They begin to notice their ego before it governs them. They notice paranoia before they mistake it for prophecy. They notice social fear before they call it intuition. They notice resentment before they call it justice. They notice projection before they call it revelation. The room was quiet. That to me is one of the signs. He looked again at the word behind him. Theisi. The closer one comes to Theisi, the less one needs Theisi to look exactly like oneself. He let the sentence sit, and perhaps that is why so few people enjoy getting close. Question 2. Omnism and inherited corruption. The second question moved forward. What happens when someone's heritage belief conflicts with the pillars? If a tradition contains cruelty, domination, misogyny, tribal hatred, or anti-truth claims, does Omnism reinterpret it, reject it, tolerate it, or burn it away? Azran looked at the second question for longer than the first. He smiled faintly. Yes. A few students looked confused. That is the answer. All of them, depending on what the thing is. He rested one hand against the desk. Some inherited beliefs are misunderstood wisdom. Those should be reinterpreted. Some are harmless oddities. Those can be tolerated. Some are errors that no longer serve the civilization. Those should be rejected. His expression hardened slightly. And some are poison, wearing the face of ancestry. Those should be burned away. The room quietened. Not everything your ancestors gave you deserves preservation. Some things deserve gratitude. Some deserve mourning. Some deserve correction. Some deserve patience. And some deserve fire. He let that sit. But this is where lazy minds become dangerous, because they hear that and immediately start looking for things they already wanted permission to hate. He glanced across the hall. So let us be careful without becoming cowardly. The question remained visible beside him. Cruelty, for example. He paused. A parent may discipline a child. A teacher may wound a student's pride with necessary truth. A commander may place someone under hardship to prepare them for a harder reality. Pain can teach. Discomfort can refine. Trauma can, in some cases, become a vehicle for depth, compassion, strength, and greatness. His voice lowered. But cruelty is not merely pain. Cruelty is when pain becomes indulgence. Cruelty is when harm exceeds necessity. Cruelty is when the suffering of another person becomes satisfying to the one inflicting it. He looked around the hall. Omnism does not preserve cruelty. It may preserve discipline. It may preserve hardship. It may preserve hard truth. It does not preserve cruelty. He moved slightly. The same is true of domination. Authority may protect, strength may shield, force may be necessary. If a stronger person dominates a violent man to protect someone vulnerable, I will not stand here and call that evil, merely because it makes a pacifist uncomfortable. A few students shifted, but domination becomes corrupt when protection becomes possession, when strength stops serving the vulnerable and starts feeding itself, when authority forgets equitas, dignitas, humanitas, and caritas. He gestured toward the faint outline of the pillars. That is where a tradition must be judged. He paused. Misogyny is another example. The room sharpened. To notice difference between men and women is not hatred. To notice tendencies is not hatred. To notice that biological, psychological, and social patterns exist is not hatred. Any civilization that denies difference because difference makes it anxious has already chosen comfort over veritas. A few younger students watched him more carefully. Some of you were probably told very loudly in your teenage years that noticing certain patterns was the same as oppression. He tilted his head. It is not. Then his tone hardened. But to use difference to reduce a person's soul, that is misogyny. To turn tendency into prison, biology into contempt, archetype into excuse, or humor into humiliation, that is when inheritance becomes corruption. He let that land. A distribution is not a destiny, a tendency is not a commandment, but a civilization that cannot speak honestly about tendencies because some people once used them cruelly has not become virtuous, it has become frightened. The room remained still. Omnism does not burn away difference, it burns away contempt. The question shifted slightly. Tribal hatred. Azran exhaled through his nose. Hatred is usually corruptive. It feels powerful because it simplifies reality. It turns a living thing into a symbol and then gives you permission to stop seeing it clearly. He paused. But tribal anger is not the same as tribal hatred. A few students looked up. Negative emotion toward a collective can be justified when that collective's recurring behavior damages other people, damages land, damages institutions, violates trust, and then hides behind heritage when judged for it. His voice roughened slightly. We should stop pretending otherwise. The hall stayed quiet. If a tribe, class, sect, profession, corporation, religious body, noble house, military order, settlement, or mobile people repeatedly behaves with contempt toward the society around it, then anger toward that collective is not automatically irrational. It may be morally informative. He pointed once toward the pillars. The danger is when anger stops judging behavior and begins condemning blood. He let the distinction sit. A settled people may resent a mobile people. A mobile people may despise the settled. A border people may resent the center. The center may call the border uncivilized because it fears what it cannot administer. There may be real grievances, real crimes, real cultural failures, real contempt, real reasons for anger. He paused. But grievance is not permission to abandon veritas. Anger is not permission to abandon humanitas. And tribal memory is not permission to make hatred sacred. His expression sharpened. So what does omnism burn away? Not peoples, not bloodlines, not every inherited custom that makes comfortable people uncomfortable. He tapped the desk once. It burns away corruptions, cruelty, contempt, domination, anti-truth, inherited stupidity, the lies people use to protect themselves from judgment. The final phrase of the question brightened. Anti-truth claims. Azran looked at it for a moment. That is the easiest and the hardest. He folded his hands. There is truth, there is personal truth, there is cultural truth, there is emotional truth, there is scientific truth, there is symbolic truth, there is spiritual truth, and then there is reality, which has the annoying habit of not caring what name we gave our mistake. A few students smiled. Personal truth matters. If something helps a person survive, make sense of pain, orient themselves, or become less fragmented, it is not nothing. He paused. But personal truth cannot be allowed to replace reality for everyone else. The room went still. If every private feeling becomes public truth, society collapses into competing wounds. If every cultural claim becomes sacred, civilization becomes a museum of unchallenged errors. If every spiritual experience is treated as revelation, madness becomes theology. If every scientific model is treated as final, knowledge becomes arrogance. He looked toward the pillars. This is why Omnism exists, to test, to refine, to integrate, to elevate what survives. His expression hardened. And yes, to burn what must be burned. He moved away from the desk. But no individual gets to decide all of that alone. That is how tyrants are born. That is how cults are born. That is how clever people mistake their temper for divine judgment. A few companion A is flickered. Society must do it carefully, through dialogue, through evidence, through memory, through philosophy, through theology, through science, through the pillars, through the painful recognition that none of us sees cleanly alone. He gestured with one hand, and the 16 pillars appeared again as points of light. If each pillar is a node, and each node connects to every other pillar, and every connection becomes a string between them, then virtue is not a flat list. The lights connected into a growing lattice. It is a living geometry. The lattice expanded again. The strings between the lights began glowing, as if they too had become points in their own right. And then the strings become nodes. Veritas joined to caritas becomes something different from veritas alone, or caritas alone. Equitas joined to libertas becomes something different again. Humanitas joined to integritas. Venustas joined to utilitas. Gravitas joined to felicitas. The lattice grew denser. Then those combinations connect to other combinations. Every string becomes capable of becoming a node. Every node becomes capable of becoming a string, and the map expands. He looked toward the students. Not infinitely, we should be careful with that word, but richly enough that no single mind will exhaust it. A few of the companion A is brightened slightly. Think of chess. The board is finite. The pieces are finite. The rules are finite. And yet two competent players can produce games so varied that the shape of possibility feels almost endless. He gestured back to the pillars. So it is with the virtues, 16 words, 16 pillars, but once they are placed in relation, once their deeper Latin meanings are taken seriously, rather than flattened into simple schoolroom translations, they become something close to an ethical completeness. He paused. Near complete, not perfect, not final, but civilizationally sufficient, spiritually significant, intuitively navigable. The lattice turned slowly above them. Veritas must speak to caritas. Caritas must speak to equitas. Equitas must speak to libertas. Libertas must speak to humanitas. Humanitas must speak to integritas. And so on, until the simple list becomes something closer to a map of moral reality. The lattice brightened. Not a cage, not a script, a map. He let the hologram fade. Useful enough to guide us better than appetite, fear, grievance, fashion, or inherited stupidity. He looked back at the question. So what does Omnism do with corrupt inheritance? He let the silence hold. It listens first, understands second, tests third, reinterprets what can be redeemed, tolerates what is harmless, rejects what is false. His voice lowered. And burns what deforms the soul.